Nicholas Roerich, Stravinsky, and Kraft describe this scene and its position in the larger drama in various similar ways. After this uprush of terrestrial joy, the second scene sets a celestial majesty before us. Young virgins dance in circles on the sacred hill amid enchanted rocks. Then they choose the victim they intend to honor. The great sacrifice, night. The maidens perform secret games and group themselves in circles. One of the maidens is chosen for the sacrifice. Fate points to her twice. Twice she is caught in one of the circles without an exit. In accordance with the musical representation of day and night, which is also a further dialogue of the sexes, part 2 being essentially female, the house lights were to have been extinguished at the end of part 1, and part 2 was to have begun in darkness. The curtain opens again to a dance, again in choreographed character by 6 females. The dancers pace the perimeter of a circle drawn on the ground, which represents the cycle of nature and in which the chosen one is to die. At the point where the chosen one is selected, the men appear at the sides of the stage as though for an ambuscade, and the women retire. Dramatically and musically, the scene is an exclusively female space, a circle dance for the young women. It's in a pastoral expressive mode, right up to its violent concluding measures, which act as a transition to the following scene. It is linked in both expressive mode and musical content with spring rounds and the introduction to part 2. The scene is arranged in 5 sections. The first section, block 1, presents the mystic circle melody in full in a chorale-like setting. The second section presents the mystic circle's second theme. The third section is a stately procession with a religious feeling and with an ironic reference to an old hunting call. The fourth section returns to the main mystic circle melody. This sort of formal return is a musical emblem of the pastoral. The fifth and final section is a transition to the next scene, marked by sudden and violent change of expressive mode. The end of the mystic circle melody marks the moment when the sacrificial victim, the chosen one, is designated by fate. After many premonitions in the introduction to part 2, we now hear the mystic circle melody in its definitive form at full length and garbed in rich 6-part plaining accompaniment within a mostly diatonic environment. This circle dance for the young women epitomizes the feminized pastoral expressive mode. In block 1, the mystic circle melody, introduced gradually and extensively developed in the previous scene, is now heard in its definitive shape. The mystic circle melody is basically an 8-measure sentence of a pretty traditional kind. It's also pretty clearly in B major, although with lots of odd features. The regularity, the relatively traditional organization, and the diatonicism are all markers of the feminized pastoral mode. The melody can be understood in relation to a relatively simple tonal prototype, in which 2 6-beat hypermeasures compose out a descending minor third, F sharp, D sharp. The vagaries of the metrical surface result from the gentle insertion of a few additional notes, very mildly distorting the regularity of the prototype. Part 2 is mostly concerned with the major second as a generative interval, but the mystic circle melodies focus on the minor third, recalls the constructive minor thirds of Part 1, especially the pastoral melodies like the Spring Rounds melody. These two melodies are slow, lyrical, played by solo instruments in high register. They both move within a 0257 frame in a transparent diatonic environment. They both gently distort a regular underlying meter with the insertion of additional melodic notes into repeated melodic segments. Both epitomize the feminized pastoral mode. The melody attracts a rich planing accompaniment in 6 parts, scored for 6 solo violas. It has the atmosphere of a hymn or chorale, a hint of a religious rite. The harmonies are mostly triads, possibly with both major and minor thirds, and possibly with an added seventh, with dissonant distractors. The dissonant distractor is often the lowest sounding note. The final chord in particular, G sharp minor with the semitone distractor A in the bass, will reveal its full importance at the end of the scene. Beneath that rich chorale in the melody layer, the harmony layer consists of a steady 4-note ostinato, which replicates the 4-note frame of the melody, B, C sharp, E, F sharp, or 0257. The young women's circle dance continues with the new melodic focus, the mystic circle's second theme. It appears in 2 versions, one within the Dorian tetrachord 0235 and the other expanded to the minor pentachord 02357. The music remains in a pastoral expressive mode. Block 2 introduces a second theme for the mystic circle. The mystic circle's second theme is oriented not toward 0257, like the first theme, but toward 0235. It is organized as a sentence. Like the first theme in B major, the second theme is diatonic in E flat minor. As always, the pure diatonic is an emblem of the pastoral. The mystic circle's second theme connects closely via dyadic voice leading with the first theme as it appeared in its first statement at the beginning of the introduction to Part 2. In the harmonic layer, there is a repeated 3-note pattern, A, B flat, A flat, with each note decorated with a whole tone trill above. The 3-note pattern affirms a steady 3/4 meter and thus conflicts with the nearly regular 5-beat pattern in the melody. This 3-beat ostinato has a whole tone orientation, both in the whole tone trills on each note and in the melodic framework it moves within, A flat, B flat. As such, it connects with the whole tone network set in motion in the previous scene. In Block 3, the Mystic Circle's second theme is expanded from a perfect fourth to a perfect fifth. In this new version of the Mystic Circle second theme, the melodic frame expands from 0235 to 02357. It consists of a threefold repetition of a six-beat variant of the initial chunk of the theme. This expansion involves moving the lower whole tone, E flat F, down by whole tone to D flat E flat. The result is that the expanded second theme is related by T-1 to the initial statement of the first theme. First theme and second theme, in both original and expanded versions, are bound tightly together and all express the feminized pastoral. Within the melodic layer, the second theme attracts a planing accompaniment. Unlike the elaborate triadic planing of the first theme, however, the second theme acquires nothing more than an upper line in parallel 11s. The Mystic Circle's second theme continues in Block 4. The Mystic Circle's second theme begins with a Dorian tetrachord, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, which is then expanded to a full major pentachord, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp. It thus represents a smooth continuation of the same melody as it appeared in blocks 2 and 3. The whole steps within the melody inch down by whole step. The gradual process leads the second theme down to the level of the first theme as it was heard at the beginning of the scene. The Mystic Circle's second theme also moves to the level of the Women's Entreaty theme from Rival Tribes. The Dorian tetrachord C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp thus serves as a musical marker for lyrical feminine second themes in both scenes. The melody is 6 beats in length, occupying 2 measures of 3/4, and the block contains 4 statements of it. In its regularity, it continues the arrangement from the previous block. Taking all of the statements of the Mystic Circle's second theme into account, through blocks 2 through 4, we find 9 iterations of a melodic unit in a 20-bar passage, extremely repetitive even by the standards of this work. All 9 begin the same way, but with slightly different tags. Through the repetitions, we can discern a simple underlying metrical and melodic prototype, a repeated 6-beat melody organized into 3 hypermeasures of 3 plus 3 plus 4 hyperbeats. Over the course of the whole passage, the melody expands from 0235 to 0257 and then returns to 0235, but at a different location, a whole step lower. The planing continues. There is a counter melody that moves mostly in parallel 11s with the second theme melody. As with the 2 previous blocks, the harmony layer contains a series of whole tone trills, a repeated 6-beat pattern that is aligned with the melody and counter melody and simply repeats the 3rd section of block 3 a whole tone lower. We are still in a tranquil female space, and the expressive mode is still mostly pastoral, but there is a slight affective shift from a circle dance to something more like a solemn religious procession. Block 5 introduces a new melody, the Mystic Circle Procession. The Mystic Circle Procession melody begins with bare leaps from A to D, and then fills that interval as a melodic frame. The Mystic Circle Procession melody bears an obvious relationship to the hunting call from the ritual of abduction. This resemblance serves to heighten the expressive distance between these moments, from military male sexual violence against women, scored for French horns, to a solemn procession of young women moving in a ritualistic circle scored as a flute duet. The harmony layer is reduced to a whole tone oscillation between C sharp and D sharp. It is presented in the tempo of a slow march or solemn procession. The women are moving steadily around their circle. This whole tone is embedded in the emerging whole tone network, which extends from the opening notes of the introduction to part 2 through the sacrificial dance. C sharp D sharp can also be understood as an incomplete fill of a C sharp G sharp frame. With the melody oriented toward D A, this passage thus recalls the opening of the ballet, another moment of feminized pastoral. This block also recalls another instance of the feminized pastoral, the night music opening of the introduction to part 2. There we had alternating minor triads on C sharp and D sharp, above harmony framed by D A, and in anticipation of a melody also framed by D A. The procession continues in Block 6. The mystic circle procession melody has been reduced to its first 2 notes, rocking back and forth between A and D, with D sharp twice subbing in for D. A new harmony layer, an ostinato and horns and trumpets, amplifies D A as a harmonic focus. The procession ends, and the first theme, the mystic circle melody, returns. The thematic return, the formal emblem of the pastoral mode, effectively closes off the scene. Within this section, which is mostly concerned with thematic return, there are 2 sharp premonitions of the following scene, little brass tags to the pastoral reminiscence, hinting at the military outbursts soon to come. In Block 7, the mystic circle melody returns. We hear the first measure of the melody 4 times, and it has been compressed in ambitus from 0257 to 0235. The whole tone diads move symmetrically up or down by whole tone to their new positions. The melodic frame has been inverted from a perfect 5th, B F sharp, to a perfect 4th, F sharp B. The reference to the opening of the scene is clear in the shared structural 5th, B F sharp. In this compressed form, The melody creates additional associations. Perhaps the most important of these reaches back into the introduction to Part 2, to another of the transpositions of the full, uncompressed Mystic Circle melody. In Block 8, the Mystic Circle melody returns to its pitch level from the beginning of the scene. This final statement of the Mystic Circle melody is the culmination and conclusion of a long series of transpositions and transformations, going back to the beginning of the previous scene. At the end of the block, a contrasting measure is tacked on. It is set apart by instrumentation, played by brass and a horn-fifths hunting fanfare on top. The melody is F-sharp G-sharp, an ascending whole tone, which ties into the whole tone network. According to the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography, this is the moment when the chosen one is first differentiated from the group. She falls for the first of 2 times, but then she rises and continues as before. This little 2-note premonitory melody attracts a planing accompaniment in which 2 minor triads, each with a distractor, ascend by whole tone, following the melody in mostly parallel motion. The melody is the 5th of each triad. This 2-chord progression foreshadows the wild outburst to come in the following scene, and of the shift from pastoral, chorale-like lyrical strings to brassy horn calls to military aggressive violence. In Block 9, the melody riffs on the second half of the Mystic Circle first theme, with something like its original planing accompaniment. The block ends with the premonitory horn fifths. The Mystic Circle melody is joined by a new tremolo figure in the harmony layer. The tremolos, played pianissimo by the violins divisi on harmonics plus flutes, lends a hushed, mysterious, expectant feeling. It brings to the fore the 5 + 6 = 11 trichord that is about to assume such a prominent position in the music. Like the previous block, this block ends with a tacked-on, spliced-in premonitory measure, an ascending whole tone in the melody with a planing accompaniment of minor triads with distractors played by brass and with horn fifths on top. It is a perfect fifth higher than the same music in Block 8, and its melody, C-sharp, D-sharp, repeats the last 2 notes of the Mystic Circle melody. The concluding harmony, G-sharp minor with A in the bass, also takes us back to the ending of the Mystic Circle melody. In the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography, this is the moment when the chosen one falls for the second time. She gets up and the others push her to the center of the circle, then throw themselves in flight around her. The bass note A not only dissonates the G-sharp minor triad, but also hints at the principal bass tone of the following scene. The chord thus consists of a backward-looking triad and a forward-looking dissonant bass note. C-sharp, D-sharp in the melody also connects back to the ostinato in the Mystic Circle procession, and beyond that, back into part 1. Most of these melodies are in women-dominated dramatic situations and evocations of the feminized pastoral mode, of which C-sharp, D-sharp appears to be a motivic marker. This is the moment when the chosen one is selected and immobilized. According to the score, the dance is interrupted. One of the girls is designated by fate as the sacrificial victim. The chosen one remains immobile until the sacrificial dance. According to Kraft, this is also the moment when all of the other female dancers exit. The men appear at the sides of the stage as though for an ambuscade, and the women retire. The expressive shift is apparently from female, pastoral, to male, military. But the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography has both this transitional passage and the entire following scene danced by the women. Stravinsky himself imagined the next scene as a savage dance of Amazons. This transitional passage marks a shift from the pastoral to the military, but danced by women in both cases. In Block 10, the premonitory measure from Block 9 is now extended into an increasingly wild transition. The premonitory measure now becomes the insistently repeated upper strand, featuring the same melodic dyad, C-sharp, D-sharp, the same horn fifths, the same triads with distractors, and the same brass instrumentation. The dissonant distractor A in the bass predicts the principal bass note of the following scene. It points ahead with increasing urgency. This is the moment when the sacrificial victim has been chosen, and the expressive mode shifts rapidly from feminized pastoral to militaristic violence, of which the horn fifths are a marker. The block ends with a rapid sweep up to a big chord. This measure will turn out to be a recurring unit in the following scene. The upward sweep begins as parallel minor triads, then shifts to parallel 0-1-6s, arranged as 6 plus 5 equals 11. The chord at the top of the sweep is G, C-sharp, F-sharp, with the previously melodic C-sharp, D-sharp frozen into the chord. The new melody on the lower staff is a brass fanfare and thus creates a militaristic dramatic space. Block 11, the final block of the scene, consists of 11 percussive statements of a big dissonant chord. Leaving out the timpani parts, which are there to enhance the smashing, violent impact of the chords, we find two equivalent trichords, 5 plus 6 equals 11, or 6 plus 5 equals 11. The Hodson-Nijinsky choreography marks each chord with a furious stamp by the dancers. The instrumentation, strings, all down bow, here supplemented by timpani, recalls the augur's chord. The full significance of the chord will not become clear until the next movement, for which it functions as a sort of referential sonority. The chord is a sonic marker for the military mode, for ritualized violence, and especially for the savagery of the following scene. It marks the moment when the newly chosen one finds that she has, in Stravinsky's words, wandered into a stone labyrinth from which there is no exit.